Hello again, everyone. I'm Eric Sperling. Thank you so much for joining us. This is episode 6 of All in Education's Sepas, and I would like to welcome today's experts. Stephanie Parra is back in studio with us, of course, Executive Director of All in Education. Dr. Marla Franco is with us today, Assistant Vice Provost, Hispanic Serving Institution Initiatives at the University of Arizona. And back on the stage, we have Gilbert Arvizu, Community Development and Engagement Director at Valley of the Sun United Way. So thank you all for being here. But before we get into the panel, I want to tell you a little bit about All in Education. All in Education is a local nonprofit organization that exists to build an Arizona where all communities have access to opportunity and justice. Now, their work is focused on strengthening the Latino community by closing the representation gap to build power, influence, and authority across Arizona boardrooms and classrooms. Through their monthly Sepas series, All in Education is working to bridge their advocacy efforts across multiple factors outside of the classroom that are impacting the educational outcomes of students. They're calling these factors the social determinants of education. Sepas will focus on having real, thought-provoking conversations with leaders and community members and identify solutions to work towards creating meaningful changes in the systems meant to serve our communities. Now, today's conversation will discuss an issue that is directly correlated to many of the other issues we've discussed as the factors of social determinants of education. Today, we're going to be talking about food insecurity. Now, here's a stat. According to Feeding America, nearly 800,000 people in Arizona are facing hunger, and of them, about 270,000 are children. So this translates to 1 in 6 children facing hunger every day. Food insecurity is an epidemic that is directly linked to poverty, housing insecurity, and the economy and workforce. This issue illustrates perfectly how all these factors are interconnected and impact one another, including education. And before we start the panel, it's one thing for us to talk about it, but it's another thing for us to show you the impact. Here's Victoria's story.
Hi, my name is Victoria Villalba. I am an Adelante Fellow, and I'm also the Data and Research Coordinator for Instituto, and I'm an Arizona native. This is my home. My earliest memories of education is my mom getting us ready for school. There's 3 siblings, and just that morning rush of having her, get all 3 of us ready was something that I always remember. And that's like a marked piece that I remember my mom over the years, being very present in our education and making sure that we rushed out of the house to get to the bus on time. One of the pieces around food insecurity that my family experienced there was resources to reliable transportation. We would go grocery shopping, right? We would go and my dad would take us, or we would take a taxi. And it wouldn't be near the neighborhood. We had to drive away to the grocery store, and then we would do the shopping. I remember we would go outside after doing shopping and going to the payphone to call my dad to pick us up or to try to get another taxi. And that always took a long time because my dad was working and my mom had to do grocery shopping. So that was a big piece, and it happened often where we were trying to, get back to the house. As a young person, we were like, it was just how things were, and it wasn't until I was older that I've been able to kind of think and reflect about how these challenges and how they affected my daily life and the lives of my community. I want to hug my younger self, and something that folks know about me is that I am connected to my community, right? And a lot of us in our community experienced this, right? In the neighborhood where I grew up, the jail was closer, juvie was closer to us than a food store, right? And that says a lot about this place where I grew up, about the investment, right? The investment was there to criminalize young people, but not there to have access to food. Here in Arizona, it's 1 out of 3 households have experienced food insecurity. That's a big number, and it's in different places. So some communities are affected more than others. And then there's a trickle effect of many, many things that are intersected, that are not just like, food insecurity is not isolated. It's connected to transportation, to job security, it's connected to health, it's connected to many different pieces. And I think that's part of this like invisible piece of what food insecurity is, and it's everywhere.
So Stephanie, so impactful to hear some of those stories, and let's get right into this conversation, defining food insecurity. Seems like a pretty straightforward issue, but can you talk about what exactly it is and how the impact of lack of access to healthy food, some of the impacts that it creates?
Yeah. So, Victoria mentioned it a bit in her talk. food insecurity doesn't just impact, the school or the home. It goes beyond that. It really impacts a child's development. If a child is food insecure, they are going to probably experience delays in their own emotional development, their physical development, their mental health and wellness. And I think a lot about, even just to make this a little bit more relatable for people, think about when you go almost a whole day without eating and the emotional toll that it takes. What do we call that? We call that being hangry, right? We're hangry when we don't eat. So imagine being a young child who is experiencing food insecurity and not having the language to describe, not having access to food or that they're hungry. That might show up in different ways in how they behave. It might lead to discipline issues at school because they might be experiencing some emotional stress, things like that. So it can be a very complex issue that, again, stems beyond the school and the home, and something that we have to be mindful of in education as well.
And Gilbert, food insecurity is not a new thing. We've been talking about this before, but a lot has changed since the pandemic. We're talking about loss of income, loss of jobs here. So can you talk a little bit about that impact and some of the work that you're doing right now at Valley of the Sun United Way?
Yes, absolutely. The pandemic has increased issues all across the board. All those social determinants that were mentioned have all become worse. What we've done at Valley of the Sun United Way is two specific programs. One was our Senior Connect program, where we used $1 million of our Mackenzie Scott transformational funds to provide 140,000 frozen delivered meals to older adults in the Northwest Valley. And we got some great data back from that program around barriers that they were facing to food insecurity to help plan our next program. And the second thing is actually been talked about on one of your shows is Blue Zones. We're supporting the Blue Zone Community Health Planning Initiative, and a part of that is looking at not only the diet, but the social environment in which people are living in, and just like Victoria mentioned, how that affects someone's food insecurity.
Absolutely. Dr. Franco, interesting here. You serve a different population of students at the university. So does food insecurity impact college students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the rate at which students within K through 12 qualify for free and reduced lunch, those set of circumstances don't just magically change when they enter colleges or universities. Those set of circumstances likely follow them and pose some very serious challenges, to the types of ability to focus on their academics that we also expect them, to experience in K through 12. So, it absolutely is a big issue. Nationally, among four-year higher education students, there is food insecurity at a rate of nearly half of college students within a four-year setting. At the University of Arizona in particular, 1 out of 3 experience food insecurity.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So Stephanie, when you hear something like that, you hear that stat, we start talking about responsibility. Like, where does the responsibility fall on? In your opinion, who should be stepping up in these situations?
Yeah. I think right now the responsibility falls a lot on schools, and when we've talked about this before with a couple of the superintendents we had on earlier in the series, that this expectation of schools to be social service agencies to provide all of the resources and supports that students and families need, and then not being given the tools and the resources to do that effectively. So we have to make sure that we are sharing the responsibility, and that the community is really coming together, community-based organizations and policymakers, decision makers with resources, that we are creating programs and supports in the infrastructure so that families have access to healthy, nutritious food, and that our children are not experiencing food insecurity at the rates that they do right now in Arizona.
So with that being said, Dr. Franco, are there things universities are doing, or specifically University of Arizona doing, to curb this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have definitely seen a proliferation of the development of campus pantries. And so you see those sets of social services within the communities actually start sprouting up and taking root and be available to students on our respective campuses. So we actually have a campus pantry which was established in 2012. It was started started actually by a group of volunteer students who came together and mobilized and really saw the need and wanted to provide that support and service to our campus community. And since then, it has grown tremendously. I mean, you walk in and it's almost like a small little, you know, kind of grocery store, and they've got a whole point system penned down so that students know exactly, you know, what they can get on a given week. And we've actually paired that with additional resources. So they often also host individuals from the community who come in and support registering for SNAP benefits, for example. We also, within close proximity to the campus pantry, also house a closed pantry so that students, you know, can get professional attire if perhaps they've got an internship or a job interview coming up. And so we are really trying to centralize those things, and I think that that's not unique to the University of Arizona. We see that type of stuff sprouting up across colleges and universities across the nation.
That's fantastic. Gilbert, I want to ask you about some of the different causes of food insecurity and something called food deserts. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 drivers of food insecurity are poverty and the cost of food. When it comes to food deserts, just how Victoria described it, you know, her family had to drive very far to get access to that food. But the conversation has shifted a little bit. You know, South Phoenix and West Phoenix, they have supermarkets, they have grocery stores. So it's actually looking at how can we get the nutritious food in those stores out into the community. That's the focus now of many of our food partners. And
you're right, yeah, Victoria was mentioning she lived closer to a juvenile detention center than she did a grocery store. So Gilbert, a follow-up question to that. Food insecurity can vary, right? Talk about the different levels of food insecurity.
Absolutely. So there's 2 somewhat definitions of it. Low food security is where someone has access to food, but it's not healthy food. And we see this in our schools. As the price of food starts to increase, our schools are having to provide a processed food and just unhealthy foods for our children, which are connected to cognitive decline in some studies. The other definition is very low food security, and that's where folks are actually missing meals. They're not getting the nutrition that they need to live a healthy life.
Stephanie, it sounds you know, almost obvious that this definitely impacts a student's education, but and you mentioned hangry before and other things. How does this impact, in your perspective, a student's education, ability to succeed in school?
Yeah, you know, one thing we've said is, like, if a child is coming to school hungry, how can we expect them to focus on teaching and learning? If the only thing I can think about right now is the fact that my last meal came when I left the school at lunchtime yesterday, and I haven't had anything to eat since then. And I know a lot of schools, especially Title I schools, now have the resources to provide both breakfast and lunch at school. But, you know, children are not at school all of the time, and so they are missing meals, and that allows them or causes them not to be able to focus on the traditional teaching and learning that we need them to in the classroom. So we have to get a little bit more creative about how we bring resources, bring the healthy, nutritious foods that kids need onto the campuses. One thing, you know, we've started exploring is, can we do campus-based farmers markets, and also use it as an opportunity to educate parents about the importance of healthy, nutritious options for their children, and things like that. So can it be an education opportunity while we're also addressing the food insecurity problem?
I love that idea. Dr. Franco, let's talk a little bit more about who this impacts. Like, at the University of Arizona, is there a specific demographic you're seeing this impacts the most?
Yes, absolutely. You know, we have disaggregated our data a numerous set of ways, and in particular, we see that our Hispanic Latinx population, Native American, and African Black students are disproportionately negatively impacted by food insecurity. In particular, our Hispanic and Latinx students experience it at a rate of about 43%. And so that disaggregated data really helps us come to understand who is disproportionately impacted, and it helps inform some of our outreach and communication strategies just so that we help ensure that students know that the campus pantry exists. And it also helps the university better understand, who we are serving and who we need to be mindful of as we provide a comprehensive set of supports so that students can thrive when they're in college.
Gilbert, are you seeing a similar thing in your work?
Absolutely, and not just here in the Valley, but across the entire country. 99% of counties are just how what was just described as Black and brown families having disproportionate access to healthy food.
Stephanie, what are your thoughts when you hear that?
I'm not surprised by it at all. I think similarly from the K-12 side, that's what we see as well, right? It is who is impacted by poverty, and then simultaneously who's impacted by food insecurity. It is traditionally our communities of color, our Black and brown families who have less access to job security, more increased rates of poverty, and then of course increased rates of food insecurity.
So now it's a perfect segue into this part of the show always. What is our call to action to the community? And we'll kind of go around the room here, but we'll start with you, Stephanie. What is the call to action? And I know you had a few ideas you already rolled off, but specifically, what would you like to say?
Yeah. Similar call to action like we always do here on Sepas and our social determinants work is that this has to be a collaboration. We can't expect schools, universities to do this work on our own. We have to bring community-based organizations, policymakers, decision makers to the table to really solve big problems. And let's get creative. I mentioned the campus-based farmers market. We have an opportunity to, to blend education of families, include our parents in those conversations, and then bring some innovative solutions to the challenges that we see.
Absolutely. Gilbert, what are your thoughts? Call to action to community.
Yeah, so one thing that Valley of the Sun United Way and our partners are working on is advocating for good land use. Looking at the land that's available and seeing, can we do something like a vertical farm, which uses less water, uses less space to produce organic, nutritious food at much less of a cost than traditional agriculture. Those are the ways to think outside of the box to really address this food insecurity issue.
All right, Dr. Franco.
Yeah, absolutely. So similarly, I think, one of the things is really to kind of bring a whole host of individuals together. And so at the University of Arizona, we actually have what's called the Basic Needs Coalition. And what that is it provides a collective strategy to think about this comprehensively. And so it ties not only campus pantry and the closed pantry together, but also services and supports from counseling and psychological services and other supports that we know are connected and tied together. So in addition to the Basic Needs Coalition, it's also really making sure that we understand and not take for granted that those set of circumstances change for our students as they move from K through 12 to higher education settings.
Love that. I mean, not only was a call to action there, but there was repeatable positives in everything that was brought up just now. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate the time. Truly appreciate this conversation. Thank you so much for watching this episode of All in Education's Sepas, the social determinants of education. As a reminder, we're going to be continuing to build this conversation every single month, bringing you deeper dives around the topics. And Stephanie, I know you want to thank the Garcia Family Foundation, correct, for all the hard work they're doing in our community and supporting this series.
Absolutely. We can't do this work without our partners. Super grateful to the Garcia Family Foundation for their investment and their support in helping us put this series on.
Dr. Franco, Gilbert, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time on Sepas.